The conference room fell silent except for the sound of Naomi's heartbeat thundering in her ears. Her supervisor's words echoed like a death sentence. Your performance has been lacking and we're letting you go effective immediately. 20 pairs of eyes stared at her as security waited by the door. The humiliation burned through her chest as she gathered her few personal items from the desk she'd worked at for 3 years. The worst part wasn't losing the job. It was walking through that glass door knowing her husband Jerome would blame her, knowing his mother Patricia would have something cruel to say. As she drove home in her old Honda, Naomi's hands shook on the steering wheel. Not from fear of being unemployed, but from the weight of secrets she'd carried for so long. She pulled into the driveway of the modest 2-bedroom house she shared with Jerome and his mother. Before she could even get her key out, the front door swung open. Patricia stood there with her arms crossed, her gray hair pulled back tight, her face twisted in disgust. Well, look who's home early. Let me guess they finally figured out you're worthless. Naomi's stomach dropped. How did you? Jerome's friend works in HR. Word travels fast when someone gets fired for being incompetent. Patricia's voice dripped with satisfaction. I told my son he married beneath him. I told him you'd drag him down eventually. Where's Jerome? Naomi asked quietly, still standing on her own doorstep. Inside packing. He's finally come to his senses. Patricia stepped aside with a cruel smile. Go on in. See what a real woman looks like. Naomi walked through her own front door and froze. Jerome sat on the couch next to a young woman with blonde hair and bright red lips. Tiffany. She recognized her from Jerome's office parties. The woman was practically sitting in his lap, her hand resting on his chest. There she is, Jerome said without looking up. His voice was cold, different from the man she'd married 5 years ago. The failure. I was wondering when you'd drag yourself home. Jerome, we need to talk. No. He stood up, his 6-foot frame towering over her. We don't need to talk. I'm done talking. I'm done pretending this marriage was anything more than a mistake. Tiffany giggled softly. Baby, don't be too hard on her. It's not her fault she couldn't keep up with your success. The words hit like a slap. Naomi looked at this woman, this stranger, sitting in her living room calling her husband baby, like she belonged there. Like Naomi was the intruder. 5 years, Naomi whispered. 5 years of marriage and this is how. Jerome's hand moved so fast she barely saw it coming. The spit hit her cheek, warm and disgusting. She stood there stunned as it dripped down her face. Don't you dare try to guilt me, he snarled. You lost your job because you're lazy and stupid. My mother was right about you from day one. You're nothing but dead weight. Patricia clapped her hands slowly from the doorway. Finally, some backbone from my son. Tiffany here has a real career. She's a pharmaceutical sales rep making 6 figures. She can actually contribute to his future. Naomi wiped the spit from her cheek with the back of her hand. Something inside her went very still and very quiet. She looked at Jerome, really looked at him. At his designer clothes that she'd bought him. At the watch on his wrist that had been her anniversary gift. At the smug expression on his face as he wrapped his arm around another woman. Get out, he said simply. Take your stuff and get out. I want you gone before Tiffany and I get back from dinner. This is my house too, Jerome. My name is on the deed. Actually, it's not. Patricia pulled out a folder from behind her back. My son refinanced 2 months ago. Your signature was, let's say, no longer needed. Funny how easy paperwork can be when you're too stupid to pay attention. The ground seemed to shift under Naomi's feet. They'd forged her signature. They'd stolen her home while she was at work, trusting her husband to handle their finances like she always had. You have 1 hour, Jerome said, checking his expensive watch. I'm taking my woman somewhere nice. Somewhere you could never afford. When we get back, I want you gone. Tiffany stood up and smoothed down her tight dress. Come on, baby. Let's go celebrate your freedom. She looked at Naomi with fake pity. Good luck finding another job. From what Jerome tells me, you're not exactly management material. They walked past Naomi like she wasn't even there. Jerome paused at the door and looked back. Oh, and Naomi? Don't bother trying to take anything valuable. I've already moved the important stuff. You can have your clothes and your pathetic little keepsakes. The door slammed shut, leaving Naomi alone with Patricia, who was practically glowing with satisfaction. 30 years I waited for this day, the older woman said. 30 years of watching my brilliant son waste his potential on you. He's going to marry Tiffany next month. She already has the ring picked out. Naomi said nothing. She walked to the bedroom, her former bedroom, and began packing her clothes into 2 suitcases. Everything else, all the furniture, the dishes, the life she'd built, would stay behind. But as she folded her work clothes that had hidden her real identity for years, she almost smiled. Patricia followed her, still talking. You know what your problem is? You never understood your place. Jerome needs a partner who can match his ambition, his success. You were always going to hold him back. You're right, Naomi said quietly, zipping up the second suitcase. Patricia blinked, surprised by the easy agreement. I was holding him back, Naomi continued. But not in the way you think. She walked past Patricia without explanation, carrying her suitcases to her car. As she loaded them into the trunk, she could feel the older woman watching from the window. Let her watch. Let her think she'd won. As Naomi drove away from the house, away from the life where she'd pretended to be someone small and struggling, she pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. Rachel? It's me. It's time. Rachel Martinez had been Naomi's lawyer and friend since college, and she was the only person who knew the truth. As Naomi sat in Rachel's downtown office the next morning, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive art, she felt like herself for the first time in years. I still can't believe you kept this up for 5 years, Rachel said, pouring coffee from a silver service. Playing the struggling employee while secretly owning the company they just fired you from. Naomi accepted the cup with steady hands. It was easier than I thought. People see what they expect to see. Jerome wanted a wife who needed him, who made him feel important. Patricia wanted someone to look down on. I gave them exactly what they wanted. And now they get to see who I really am. Rachel opened a thick file on her desk. Let's review your assets. Sterling Industries, the company you supposedly worked for as a low-level employee. You own 60% through shell corporations. Check. Henderson Property Group, which owns 17 commercial buildings downtown, including the one we're sitting in right now. Check. Coastal Holdings, which includes that beachfront mansion in Malibu that Jerome and Patricia don't know exists. The one with the infinity pool and the wine cellar, yes. Rachel shook her head in amazement. Your net worth is approximately $47 million. And Jerome thinks you're unemployed. Naomi had started building her business empire at 22, right after college. Her grandmother had left her $50,000, and instead of spending it on a wedding like Jerome had wanted, she'd used it as seed money. Real estate investments, silent partnerships, careful acquisitions. She'd been brilliant and ruthless, but she'd hidden it all behind the mask of a simple working wife. The divorce papers are ready, Rachel continued. Given that he refinanced the house through fraud, we can actually pursue criminal charges. But I assume you have something more creative in mind? Much more creative. Naomi stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. Jerome thinks he's free. He thinks he's upgraded to a better life. He has no idea that his freedom is about to become the most expensive thing he's ever experienced. What's the first move? I go back to Sterling Industries. Not as an employee this time. As the owner. Naomi turned back to Rachel with a smile that was all sharp edges. I think it's time for some management changes. That afternoon, Naomi walked into the Sterling Industries building wearing a tailored business suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her natural hair was styled professionally, her makeup flawless. She looked like the successful businesswoman she'd always been, just hidden. The security guard at the front desk did a double take. Ma'am? Didn't you used to work here? I'm here to see the CEO, she said simply, handing him a business card that identified her as N. Stevens, representative of Sterling Holdings LLC. 20 minutes later, she sat across from Richard Hampton, the man who'd thought he was running her company. He was sweating despite the air conditioning. Miss Stevens, I have to say this is highly irregular. Our employee records show. I'm not here about employee records, Richard. She crossed her legs and smiled. I'm here about ownership records. I represent the majority shareholder of this company. There are going to be some changes. By the end of the meeting, Richard understood that his new boss was the woman he'd humiliated and fired just 24 hours earlier. By the end of the week, Naomi had officially taken her position as CEO of Sterling Industries. That evening, she drove to her Malibu mansion for the first time in months. She'd bought it 3 years ago but had barely used it, too busy maintaining her fake life as Jerome's struggling wife. The house sat on 2 acres of prime beachfront property, all glass and clean lines, with an infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the ocean. She poured herself a glass of wine from her private collection and stood on the deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Jerome's credit cards were declined at dinner tonight. Tiffany was not pleased. Naomi smiled. She'd been paying Jerome's credit card bills for years, letting him think his modest salary covered their lifestyle. Those payments had stopped the moment she walked out of that house. Another text. Patricia tried to buy a new purse today. Also declined. Even better. Patricia's shopping addiction had been funded by joint accounts that were now frozen, pending the divorce proceedings that Jerome didn't even know were coming yet. As the stars appeared over the ocean, Naomi planned her next moves. Jerome and Patricia thought they'd gotten rid of dead weight. They had no idea they'd just cut themselves loose from their life support. The real game was just beginning. Monday morning came with headlines that sent shock waves through the Sterling Industries office. Local company announces new CEO, major restructuring planned. Naomi's professional headshot dominated the business section of the newspaper, her smile confident and unmistakably successful. She arrived at work in a black BMW she'd bought over the weekend, parking in the spot marked reserved for CEO. Employees stared as she walked through the lobby in her designer suit, her heels clicking against the marble floor with authority. "Good morning, everyone," she announced to the gathered staff in the main conference room. "For those who don't remember me, I'm Naomi Stevens, your new CEO. Some of you knew me as the employee who was let go last week. I prefer to think of that as my resignation from a position that was beneath me." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Richard Hampton sat in the back, looking like he wanted to disappear. "There will be changes," Naomi continued, "starting with our client relationships. I'll be personally reviewing all contracts, particularly those with Henderson Construction, Morrison Financial, and Blake Industries." What the room didn't know was that she owned significant stakes in all three companies through her various holding companies. Jerome worked for Blake Industries as a project manager. Meanwhile, across town, Jerome was having the worst Monday of his life. His credit cards had been declined at 3 different places over the weekend. His bank account, which should have had his monthly salary deposit, was mysteriously low. And now his boss, Richard Blake, was calling him into an urgent meeting. "Jerome, I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go," Blake said without preamble. "Sterling Industries just pulled their contract with us. That's 70% of our revenue. We can't afford to keep project managers when we don't have projects to manage." Jerome sat stunned. "But sir, I've been with you for 3 years. My performance reviews are excellent, I know. This isn't about performance. It's about survival. We're cutting half the staff." Blake handed him an envelope. 2 weeks severance. "I'm sorry, Jerome. I really am." As Jerome cleaned out his desk, his phone buzzed with texts from Tiffany. "Baby, my card was declined at lunch. Can you transfer some money?" "Jerome, where are you? I need to talk to you about our vacation plans." "Are you ignoring me? This isn't funny." He drove home to the house that used to be his and Naomi's, his mind racing. How had everything gone wrong so fast? Just a week ago, he'd been on top of the world, finally free from his failed marriage, ready to start fresh with Tiffany. Patricia was waiting in the living room with a stack of bills and a furious expression. "Jerome, we need to talk. My credit cards aren't working. The bank says there's some kind of hold on the accounts. And what's this about you losing your job? How did you?" Richard Blake's wife called me. She heard it from her husband. Patricia's voice was rising. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't lose your job right after I got rid of that useless wife of yours." Jerome sank onto the couch where he'd sat with Tiffany just a week ago. "It's temporary, Mom. Just a setback. Sterling Industries pulled their contract, but Blake will find new clients." "Sterling Industries?" Patricia's face went pale. "Isn't that where Naomi used to work?" They stared at each other as the implications sank in. "No," Jerome said slowly. "No, there's no way. She got fired. She's probably working at some fast food place by now." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Something about the way Naomi had looked at him that last night, the strange calm in her voice when she'd agreed that she was holding him back. It hadn't been defeat. It had been something else entirely. Patricia rushed to her tablet and pulled up the local newspaper website. The headline made her gasp: "Sterling Industries names new CEO." Jerome looked over her shoulder and felt his world tilt. There was Naomi, looking nothing like the tired, defeated woman he'd married. This woman looked powerful, successful, dangerous. "That can't be right," he whispered. "That's impossible." But the article laid out her credentials, her business background, her vision for the company's future. It mentioned her recent return from extended consulting work to take over operations. "She lied," Patricia whispered. "All these years she lied to us." Jerome's phone buzzed. Tiffany was calling. Baby, I just saw the news online. Did you know your ex-wife is some kind of business mogul? The girls at work are saying she's worth millions. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake. Jerome hung up without answering. He walked to the window and looked out at the neighborhood where he'd thought he was building a successful life. A neighborhood where he now realized he didn't belong. What do we do now? Patricia asked, her voice small for the first time in years. Jerome didn't answer. He was thinking about the last thing Naomi had said to him. You're right. I was holding him back. But not in the way you think. Now he was beginning to understand what she'd meant. 2 weeks after her triumphant return as CEO, Naomi sat in her corner office reviewing the morning reports. Sterling Industries stock had jumped 15% since her appointment, and 3 major clients had already signed extension contracts. But the most satisfying report came from her private investigator. Jerome had been unemployed for 10 days now. He'd applied to 17 different companies, but somehow his applications kept getting lost in the system. What he didn't know was that Naomi's network in the business community was vast and quietly effective. Her assistant knocked and entered. Miss Stevens, you have a call from Marcus Chin at Pacific Development. Naomi picked up the phone. Marcus, how are you? Better than your ex-husband, I'd imagine. His resume crossed my desk yesterday. I handled it exactly as you suggested. And Blake Industries? Filed for bankruptcy this morning. Turns out losing 70% of your revenue stream is hard to recover from. Naomi thanked him and hung up. She felt no guilt about Blake Industries. Richard Blake had been cutting corners and overcharging clients for years. She'd simply stopped enabling his bad business practices. Her phone buzzed with a text from her private investigator. Patricia withdrew $500 from savings account. Balance now at $127. She's been asking neighbors about loan companies. Across town, Jerome sat at his kitchen table surrounded by job rejection letters and past due notices. Tiffany had stopped returning his calls 3 days ago. The last time they'd spoken, she'd made it clear that unemployed men weren't her type. Jerome, Patricia called from the living room. We need to talk about money. He found his mother sitting with a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Tony Russo from Fast Cash Loans. Your mother has explained your temporary financial situation, Tony said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I can offer you a short-term loan to help with expenses. $15,000, very reasonable terms. Jerome knew enough about loan sharks to recognize one, but looking at the stack of bills on the coffee table, he felt trapped. The mortgage payment was due in a week. The utilities had already sent disconnect notices. What kind of terms? He asked. 30% interest compounded monthly. Very standard for high-risk situations. Patricia was nodding eagerly. It's just until you find another job, honey. Something to tide us over. Against his better judgment, Jerome signed the papers. Tony handed over a check with that same cold smile. Pleasure doing business with you. First payment is due in 30 days. After Tony left, Patricia immediately started making plans. We should go shopping for some new clothes for your interviews. And I need a few things to keep my spirits up during this difficult time. Mom, this money needs to last. Don't be ridiculous. You'll have a new job within a week. You're talented and educated. Some company will snatch you up. But the days passed with no job offers. Jerome's networking events yielded polite conversations that went nowhere. His references gave glowing recommendations that somehow never translated into second interviews. Meanwhile, Tiffany had started posting photos on social media with a new man, a doctor who drove a Porsche and took her to 5-star restaurants. The pictures felt like salt in Jerome's wounds. The worst part was the growing suspicion that none of this was coincidence. Every door that had closed, every opportunity that had vanished, it all started right after Naomi's dramatic exit from their lives. One evening, desperate for answers, Jerome drove to Sterling Industries. The building looked different at night, more imposing with its lights blazing against the dark sky. He parked across the street and waited, though he wasn't sure what he was waiting for. At 9 o'clock, Naomi emerged from the elevator in the lobby. She looked incredible, confident, powerful, nothing like the woman he'd been married to. She was talking on her phone as she walked to a black BMW that cost more than he used to make in a year. As she drove past, she glanced in his direction. For a moment, their eyes met through the windshields. She didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him at all. She just looked at him with the cool assessment of someone observing a stranger. That look told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate. Naomi wasn't just successful, she was actively destroying his life, and she was doing it with surgical precision. He drove home to find Patricia pacing the living room, crying. Jerome, Tony called. He says we missed the first payment deadline. But that's impossible, you said we had 30 days. Jerome snatched the contract from her hands and read the fine print he'd been too desperate to examine carefully. The payment schedule was weekly, not monthly. They owed $4,000 immediately, and the penalties for late payment were crushing. Mom, what did you do with the loan money? Patricia's shopping bags in the corner told the whole story. Designer purses, expensive cosmetics, clothes she didn't need. She'd blown through $15,000 in 2 weeks. The phone rang. Tony's voice was no longer friendly. Jerome, we have a problem. Payment was due 3 days ago. With penalties, you now owe $5,200. I'll need that by Friday, or we'll have to discuss alternative collection methods. Jerome hung up and looked at his mother, who was still crying about her financial mistakes. For the first time in his life, he wondered if Naomi had been the smart one all along. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Naomi's Malibu home as she read the business section over coffee. The headline made her smile. Sterling Industries CEO announces major expansion. Stock soars to record high. Her phone rang. Rachel's voice was amused. Have you seen the gossip blogs this morning? I try to avoid those. You might want to make an exception today. Tiffany posted a very public breakup announcement. Apparently, dating unemployed men is beneath her standards. Naomi pulled up the post on her tablet. There was Tiffany in a selfie with her new boyfriend, a caption that read, "Sometimes you have to let go of dead weight to make room for success. Hashtag upgrade complete, hashtag Dr. Bay, hashtag living my best life." Subtle as always, Naomi murmured. It gets better. She also posted their entire text conversation. Jerome was begging her to give him another chance, promising he'd find work soon. She told him to evolve or get left behind. Naomi felt a flicker of something that might have been pity, then pushed it aside. Jerome had made his choices when he chose to humiliate her in front of another woman, when he chose to steal her home and spit in her face. Any word on Patricia? Oh, that's the best part. She took out 3 more loans from different companies to pay off the first one. She's now approximately $30,000 in debt to some very unpleasant people. Naomi's assistant called to remind her of her lunch meeting with Brandon Mitchell, the real estate developer she'd been seeing for the past month. Brandon was everything Jerome wasn't, confident without being arrogant, successful without being ruthless, and completely unimpressed by her wealth because he had plenty of his own. They met at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place where Jerome couldn't afford to take Tiffany even when he had a job. Brandon was already waiting, looking handsome in his perfectly tailored suit. "You look happy," he said, standing to kiss her cheek. "I'm happy. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "And where is that?" "In control of my own life." During lunch, Brandon told her about his latest project, a luxury resort development in Costa Rica. "I could use a business partner," he said casually. "Someone smart, someone I trust. The investment opportunity is significant." "How significant?" $20 million for a 40% stake. The projected returns are excellent, but more than that, it's a chance to build something beautiful together. Naomi studied his face. He wasn't just talking about business, and they both knew it. "I'll think about it," she said, though she'd already decided yes to both the investment and whatever else he was offering. Meanwhile, Jerome sat in his car outside the unemployment office, trying to work up the courage to go inside. His savings were gone, the loan payments were crushing him, and Patricia's spending hadn't slowed down despite their desperate situation. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Payment overdue. Consequences follow delays. We know where you live." Panic clawed at his chest. These weren't empty threats. 3 windows in his house had been broken during the night, and someone had spray-painted "Pay Up" on his garage door. Inside the house, he found Patricia on the couch, surrounded by shopping bags and debt collection letters. "Mom, what is all this?" "Just a few things to make me feel better about our situation. Did you know that Naomi is dating Brandon Mitchell? The newspaper has pictures of them at some charity gala. She was wearing a dress that cost more than we used to spend on groceries in a year." Jerome grabbed the newspaper from her hands. There was Naomi, looking radiant in a blue evening gown, her arm linked with a man who looked like he belonged on magazine covers. They were both smiling, both successful, both completely removed from the world of debt and desperation that Jerome now inhabited. "She's doing this on purpose," he said quietly. "What?" "She's destroying us on purpose. The job losses, the credit problems, the timing of everything. This isn't coincidence, Mom. This is revenge." Patricia's face went pale. But she's just a woman. How could she have this much power? Because we underestimated her. We thought she was weak, stupid, someone we could throw away. We had no idea who she really was. The doorbell rang. Through the peephole, Jerome could see Tony Russo and two men who looked like they spent their time in gyms and prisons. "Jerome," Tony called through the door. "We need to have a conversation about your payment schedule." Jerome closed his eyes and tried to think of a way out. But every door was closing, every option disappearing. He was trapped in a life that was spiraling out of control, while his ex-wife soared higher than he'd ever imagined possible. For the first time since this nightmare began, he wondered if he could find a way to apologize to Naomi, to somehow make things right. But deep down he suspected it was already too late for apologies. The Sterling Industries board meeting was packed with reporters and financial analysts. Naomi sat at the head of the polished conference table, looking every inch the successful CEO in her tailored navy suit. The quarterly reports had exceeded all expectations. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the gathered crowd, "I'm pleased to announce that Sterling Industries has acquired Henderson Construction in a merger valued at $12 million. This makes us the largest construction and development firm on the West Coast." Applause filled the room. What the audience didn't know was that Naomi had owned Henderson Construction for 2 years through a shell company. She was essentially announcing that she was buying herself, consolidating her hidden empire under one public name. After the meeting, she found Richard Hampton waiting by her office, looking nervous. Miss Stevens, I wanted to apologize again for how things ended before. If I'd known who you really were, you would have treated me differently," she finished. "That's exactly the problem, Richard. You treated me badly because you thought I was powerless. That says everything about your character. Please, I have a family. I need this job." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. "You'll keep your position, but you'll report to the new operations manager we're hiring. Consider it a learning experience in humility." The business news that evening led with Sterling Industries' expansion. Jerome watched from his living room, which now had plastic sheeting over the broken windows and furniture that was clearly being repossessed piece by piece. Patricia sat beside him, no longer the confident, cruel woman who had thrown Naomi out of the house. Her hair was unwashed, her expensive clothes wrinkled. The weight of their debts had broken something inside her. "Jerome," she whispered, "I think I made a terrible mistake." "Which one? Encouraging me to leave my wife, helping steal her house, or spending money we didn't have?" "All of it." Tears ran down her cheeks. "I was so jealous of her. She was young and pretty and you loved her. I wanted her gone, but I never imagined that she was actually successful, that she was supporting us this whole time." The truth was settling over them like a heavy blanket. Every nice dinner, every vacation, every luxury they'd enjoyed during Jerome's marriage had been funded by Naomi's hidden wealth. She'd been taking care of them while they treated her like she was worthless. Jerome's phone buzzed. Another unknown number. "Final notice. Payment due tonight or we take alternative action." He looked around the house that was falling apart, at his mother who had aged 10 years in 2 months, at the bills piled on every surface. Tomorrow the mortgage would go into foreclosure. The utilities were already disconnected. "I'm going to try to talk to her," he said suddenly. Patricia's head snapped up. "Who?" "Naomi. I'm going to try to apologize, to explain." "Jerome, no. She'll humiliate you. Can't you see what she's doing? This is all planned. She's destroying us systematically. Because we destroyed her first." Jerome stood up, his voice breaking. "We threw her out like garbage, Mom. I spit in her face. You called her worthless. We stole her home and gave it to another woman. What did we expect would happen?" Patricia started crying harder. "I just wanted what was best for you. No, you wanted what made you feel superior. And now we're paying for it." Jerome grabbed his keys. He had to try something, anything, before they lost everything completely. The Sterling Industries building looked like a fortress of success against the evening sky. Jerome's beat-up Honda looked pathetic in the parking lot full of luxury cars. He waited outside until he saw Naomi emerge from the elevator. She looked stunning as always, but when she saw him, her expression turned to ice. "Jerome." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Naomi, please. I need to talk to you. We have nothing to discuss. Please, just 5 minutes. I know what you're doing and I understand why. I deserve it. But my mother." "Your mother?" Naomi's laugh was sharp. "The woman who threw me out of my own home? Who called me worthless and stupid? Who helped you steal from me? She's drowning in debt. The loan sharks are threatening her. She could get hurt. Naomi stepped closer, and Jerome could smell her expensive perfume, could see the success radiating from every pore. Let me tell you something about debt, Jerome. For 5 years, I carried the debt of supporting you and your mother while you both treated me like I was nothing. I paid for your clothes, your car, your lifestyle, all while pretending to be broke so you could feel like a man. Jerome's face burned with shame. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. You wanted a wife you could look down on, someone who made you feel superior. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted. Naomi, please. I'll do anything. I'll sign over the house, The house was never yours, Jerome. I bought it. My money, my credit, my investment. You just lived there. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Even their home had been hers. What do you want from me? He whispered. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You wanted me gone from your life, remember? Well, I'm gone. But the consequences of your choices? Those are yours to keep. She walked past him toward her BMW, then paused. Oh, and Jerome? Stay away from me. If you come near me again, I'll have you arrested for harassment. Jerome stood in the parking lot long after her taillights disappeared, understanding finally that he had lost everything, including any chance of mercy from the woman he'd thrown away. 3 days later, Jerome lost the house. He stood on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases and his mother, watching strangers carry their furniture out to a truck. Patricia hadn't stopped crying since the sheriff had posted the eviction notice. Where are we going to go? She kept asking. Jerome, where are we going to live? Jerome's friend Marcus had offered them his couch for a week, maybe 2. After that, Jerome had no idea. His mother's shopping addiction had left them with debt collectors calling every hour and no money for even a cheap apartment. This is all her fault, Patricia muttered as they drove to Marcus's small apartment. That which is destroying us. No, Mom. This is our fault. All of it. Jerome had finally looked up Naomi's real background online. The articles about her business empire went back years. She'd been featured in Forbes as one of the top young entrepreneurs in the state. She'd built companies while he thought she was filing paperwork for minimum wage. The woman he'd married had been brilliant, powerful, and wealthy. And he'd thrown her away for a pharmaceutical sales rep who dumped him the moment he lost his job. Marcus's apartment was cramped, with thin walls and noisy neighbors. Jerome slept on the couch while Patricia took the spare room, but neither of them slept much. The loan sharks had found their new address within 24 hours. You can't hide from us forever, Tony had said when he called. $58,000 plus penalties. We want our money, Jerome. I don't have it. Then you better find it. We know where you work. I don't work anywhere. We know where your mother shops, where she gets her hair done, where she goes to church. Accidents happen to people who don't pay their debts. Jerome hung up with shaking hands. He looked at his mother, who was staring at her phone with a strange expression. What is it, Mom? It's an article about Naomi's charity work. She donated $500,000 to the Children's Hospital last week. Patricia's voice was hollow. Look at this picture. Jerome looked at the photo on her phone. Naomi was presenting a giant check to doctors in white coats, surrounded by children in hospital beds. She looked radiant, generous, everything good in the world. She could pay our debts with pocket change, Patricia whispered. And why would she do that? After what we did to her? Because maybe she still loves you? Jerome laughed bitterly. She never loved me, Mom. She loved the man she thought I could become. But I chose to become this instead. His job search had become hopeless. Every company he contacted somehow had his resume flagged as problematic. Former colleagues stopped returning his calls. His LinkedIn profile might as well have been radioactive. Meanwhile, Naomi's success story dominated the business news. Sterling Industries had announced another major acquisition. She was being interviewed on financial shows, giving speeches at business conferences. She'd become everything Jerome had always pretended to be. That evening, desperation drove him to create a fake email account and send Naomi a message. I know you probably won't read this, but I need you to know that I understand now. I understand what I lost when I lost you. I understand that you were carrying me this whole time, and I was too proud and stupid to see it. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm not asking for money because I know why you won't give it. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. You deserved so much better than me. He hit send before he could change his mind, then stared at the screen for hours waiting for a response that never came. The next morning, Marcus sat them down for an uncomfortable conversation. I'm sorry, but my lease says no long-term guests. You guys need to find somewhere else by the weekend. Patricia started crying again. Jerome felt the walls closing in around them. There's a shelter downtown, Marcus said quietly. It's not great, but it's temporary housing while you figure things out. A homeless shelter. Jerome tried to imagine his mother, who had spent 5 years criticizing Naomi for not being sophisticated enough, living in a homeless shelter. Maybe, Patricia said through her tears, maybe we could try to talk to her one more time. Together. If we both apologized. Jerome shook his head. She made it clear, Mom. She wants nothing to do with us. But surely she can't hate us forever. We're family. No, Jerome said quietly. We stopped being family the night we threw her out. As they packed their few remaining belongings, Jerome caught a glimpse of himself in Marcus's bathroom mirror. He looked hollow, defeated, nothing like the confident man who had left his wife for a younger woman just 2 months ago. That man had thought he was upgrading his life. This man was learning that some upgrades come with a price too high to ever pay. The homeless shelter smelled like disinfectant and despair. Jerome lay on a narrow cot, listening to his mother crying quietly in the women's section down the hall. They'd been there for 2 weeks and Patricia was breaking down more each day. Jerome, you need to see this, said Danny, the man on the cot next to him. He held up a cracked phone showing a business website. Isn't this your ex-wife? Jerome looked at the screen and felt his stomach drop. It was an article about Naomi's latest business venture, a partnership with Brandon Mitchell to develop luxury resorts internationally. The headline read, Power couple announces $50 million investment in global hospitality. The photo showed Naomi and Brandon at what looked like a press conference, both of them glowing with success and happiness. She was wearing a ring on her left hand that caught the camera's flash. Looks like she's moved on, Danny said with false sympathy. Jerome closed his eyes. While he was living in a homeless shelter, Naomi was building an empire with a man who deserved her. The contrast was almost too painful to bear. His phone buzzed. Tony Russo. Jerome, my patience has run out. You and your mother owe $62,000. Tonight we're collecting one way or another. I told you I don't have any money. Then maybe it's time to ask your rich ex-wife for help. She won't help us. Oh, but she will. See, I've been doing some research. Sterling Industries has a very nice headquarters building. Be a shame if something happened to it. Be a shame if your ex-wife got hurt because you couldn't pay your debts. The line went dead. Jerome stared at his phone in horror. They were threatening Naomi now, using her as leverage against him. He ran to the women's section to find Patricia, but she wasn't there. The shelter worker said she'd left that morning and hadn't come back. Jerome spent the day searching for her, calling hospitals and police stations. As evening approached, he found her sitting on a bench outside Sterling Industries, staring up at the building like she was working up courage for something. Mom, what are you doing here? Patricia looked at him with red, swollen eyes. I came to beg, Jerome. I came to get on my knees and beg that woman to help us. She won't see you. Then I'll wait here until she comes out. I'll wait here all night if I have to. Jerome sat beside her on the bench. They looked like what they were, homeless, desperate people with nowhere else to turn. At 9 o'clock, Naomi emerged from the building. She was on her phone, laughing at something Brandon was saying. When she saw them sitting on the bench, she stopped walking. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Patricia stood up and walked toward her. Naomi, please. I know you don't want to see us, but... Security, Naomi called to the guard at the building entrance. Please escort these people off the property. Wait, please. Patricia was crying now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything I said to you, everything I did. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything. Naomi looked at her with cold eyes. Yes, you were. The loan sharks are threatening to hurt you because of our debt. I can't let that happen. Whatever I did to you, you don't deserve to be hurt because of my mistakes. Something flickered in Naomi's expression. What loan sharks? Jerome stepped forward. Tony Russo from Fast Cash Loans. He said they'd target you if we don't pay. $62,000. And how exactly did you accumulate $62,000 in debt in 2 months? Patricia hung her head. Shopping. Stupid, pointless shopping. I was trying to prove I was still somebody important, and instead I proved I was just a foolish old woman. Naomi studied them both, the man who had betrayed her and the woman who had tormented her, now reduced to begging on the street outside her building. Here's what's going to happen, she said finally. I will take care of the loan sharks because I don't tolerate threats. But this doesn't change anything between us. You made your choices and you'll live with the consequences. She turned to walk away, then paused. Patricia, there's a women's shelter on 5th Street that's clean and safe. They have programs to help people get back on their feet. Jerome, the YMCA has job training programs for men your age. Use them. Naomi, Jerome called after her. Thank you. She didn't turn around. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because decent people don't deserve to be threatened by criminals, even when those people aren't decent themselves. The next day, news broke that fast cash loans had been shut down by federal investigators for illegal lending practices. Tony Russo and his associates were arrested on racketeering charges. Jerome never found out exactly how Naomi had made that happen, but he suspected her influence reached further than he'd ever imagined. She'd saved them from the loan sharks, but she'd made it clear that her mercy had limits. They were on their own now, and it was time to learn how to survive without her carrying them. 6 months after the eviction, Jerome stood in the bathroom of the YMCA where he'd been staying, staring at his reflection. The job training program had taught him basic computer skills and interview techniques, but no one would hire him. His background checks showed the fraud case from the house refinancing, and his former colleagues had apparently spread word about his reliability issues. Patricia had found a small efficiency apartment through the women's shelter program, but she was working 2 part-time jobs just to afford rent and groceries. She cleaned offices at night and worked at a thrift store during the day. The woman who had once looked down on Naomi for being beneath them was now grateful for donated clothes and food stamps. Jerome had applied for over 200 jobs in 6 months. Gas station attendant, grocery store stocker, fast food worker positions that would have horrified him a year ago were now dreams he couldn't reach. Everyone wanted references, and his only reference was his former boss at Blake Industries, who'd gone bankrupt because of the Sterling Industries contract loss. The irony wasn't lost on him. Naomi was featured on magazine covers as Businesswoman of the Year, while he couldn't get hired to flip burgers. That morning, as he walked past a newsstand, a headline caught his eye. Sterling Industries CEO announces engagement to real estate mogul. There was a photo of Naomi and Brandon at some elegant party, her engagement ring sparkling as she laughed at something he'd said. Jerome bought the magazine and read the article in a nearby coffee shop, using his last $3 on a cup of coffee he nursed for 2 hours. The couple plans to marry next spring at Mitchell's private estate in Napa Valley, the article said. Stevens credits her success to learning the true value of partnership, and says she's excited to build a future with someone who sees her real worth. The words cut deep because Jerome understood them perfectly. He'd never seen her real worth. He'd seen only what he wanted to see, a woman he could feel superior to. His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Saw the news about Naomi's engagement. Are you okay? He wasn't okay. He was living in a homeless shelter, couldn't find work, and had just read about his ex-wife's happiness in a magazine he couldn't afford to buy. But what hurt most was knowing she deserved every bit of joy she'd found. That evening he sat in the YMCA common room and did something he hadn't done in years. He wrote a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter. Dear Naomi, he began, then stopped. What could he possibly say that would matter? What apology could cover the magnitude of what he'd destroyed? He tried again. I saw the news about your engagement. I wanted you to know that I'm happy for you. Brandon looks like a good man, the kind of man who will see you for who you really are instead of who he needs you to be. You deserve someone who celebrates your success instead of feeling threatened by it. I know my opinion doesn't matter to you anymore, but I hope you'll have all the happiness I was too stupid to give you. He signed it simply Jerome, and mailed it to Sterling Industries, knowing she probably wouldn't read it. 2 weeks later, he was cleaning tables at a diner, his first job in 8 months, when he looked up to see a familiar face. Tiffany sat in a corner booth with a man in scrubs, probably her doctor boyfriend. She noticed him at the same time and her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, pity, embarrassment. She whispered something to her companion, who looked over at Jerome with curiosity. Jerome kept cleaning tables, pretending he hadn't seen them, but he could feel their eyes on him. The man who had once been good enough for Tiffany to break up a marriage was now invisible to her, just another minimum wage worker she'd never normally notice. When they left, Tiffany avoided eye contact entirely. But Jerome heard her say to her boyfriend as they passed, "Some people just never learn how to evolve." That night, he called Patricia from the payphone outside the diner. "Mom, I got a job." "Oh, Jerome, that's wonderful." "Where?" "Mel's Diner on 3rd Street. It's just bussing tables and washing dishes, but it's something." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I'm proud of you." "For washing dishes?" "For starting over. For not giving up even when everything fell apart." As Jerome walked back to the YMCA, he thought about that phrase, starting over. For the first time in months, It felt like a possibility instead of a punishment. He was 43 years old, living in a shelter and washing dishes for minimum wage. But he was finally working, finally supporting himself without depending on anyone else's hidden generosity. It wasn't much, but it was honest. And after everything that had happened, honesty felt like a form of redemption. 1 year later, Jerome stood in the kitchen of Mel's diner at 5 a.m., prepping vegetables for the breakfast rush. He'd been promoted to prep cook 6 months ago, and while it wasn't glamorous work, it was steady. He'd managed to save enough money to move into a small studio apartment, his first real home since losing the house. Patricia had also found stability. She'd been promoted to assistant manager at the thrift store and had enrolled in evening classes to become a bookkeeper. They saw each other once a week for dinner at a modest restaurant, and their conversations had changed. Gone was the bitterness and blame. They talked about work, about small accomplishments, about rebuilding their lives one day at a time. The newspaper on the break room table showed Naomi's wedding announcement. The photo was stunning. She wore an elegant dress in what looked like a garden paradise, surrounded by flowers and fairy lights. Brandon gazed at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Beautiful wedding," said Maria, one of the waitresses, looking over his shoulder. "Yeah, it is." "You know her?" Jerome hesitated. "Used to. A long time ago." "She looks happy." "She is. She deserves to be." That evening, Jerome walked to his apartment through the neighborhood where he'd once lived with Naomi. The house looked different now. New owners had painted it and added a garden. A young family lived there, kids' bikes in the driveway, the sound of laughter coming from the backyard. He didn't feel bitter seeing it anymore. That house had never really been his anyway. Nothing from that life had been real, not the money, not the lifestyle, not even his relationship with Naomi. He'd been living in a fantasy built on her hidden sacrifices. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Jerome, this is Brandon Mitchell. Naomi and I would like to meet with you and your mother tomorrow evening. Serious matter. Can you meet us at Sterling Industries at 7 p.m.? Jerome stared at the message, his heart racing. Why would they want to see him? Had he done something wrong? Violated some boundary he didn't know existed? He called Patricia immediately. "Mom, we need to talk." The next evening they stood outside Sterling Industries again, but this time they weren't desperate homeless people begging for help. Jerome wore his only good shirt and the dress pants he'd bought for job interviews. Patricia had on her best dress from the thrift store. They looked respectable if not wealthy. Naomi and Brandon met them in the lobby. Naomi looked stunning in a simple blue dress, her wedding ring catching the light. Brandon was tall, confident, everything Jerome wasn't. "Thank you for coming," Naomi said formally. "We have a proposition." They were led to a conference room where Brandon opened a folder. "We're launching a new initiative," he began. "Workforce development programs for people who've experienced financial hardship. Job training, education assistance, housing support. We want to give people real opportunities to rebuild their lives." Jerome and Patricia exchanged confused glances. "We'd like you both to be part of the pilot program," Naomi continued. "Not as charity cases but as advisors. You've been through the system. You know what works and what doesn't. We need that perspective." "I don't understand," Jerome said. Brandon leaned forward. "You'd work with social workers, employment counselors, other people who've lost everything and found their way back. Help design programs that actually help instead of just looking good on paper. The position comes with a salary," Naomi added. "Nothing extravagant but enough to live on comfortably. Health benefits, education reimbursement if you want to go back to school." Jerome felt dizzy. "What? After everything we did to you?" "Because," Naomi said quietly, "everyone deserves a chance to become better than they were. Even people who've made terrible mistakes." Patricia started crying. "I don't deserve this kindness from you." "It's not about what you deserve," Brandon said gently. "It's about what you can contribute. Naomi believes that people can change, that second chances matter. She convinced me." Jerome looked at his ex-wife, this woman he'd thrown away, who was now offering him a future he'd never dared to hope for. "I wrote you a letter," he said suddenly. "About your engagement. Did you read it?" "I did. And I realized that the man who wrote that letter wasn't the same man who spit in my face. People can grow, Jerome. Even you." 6 months later, Jerome stood in front of a group of formerly homeless men and women, teaching them about job interview skills and workplace behavior. He told them his story, all of it. The arrogance, the fall, the struggle to rebuild. "I lost everything because I thought I was better than other people," he said. "I learned that nobody is above consequences. But I also learned that consequences don't have to be the end of your story. After the session, he walked to his new apartment, a real one-bedroom in a safe neighborhood. Patricia had her own place nearby, and they had dinner together twice a week now, rebuilding their relationship on honesty instead of entitlement. On his kitchen table was a wedding invitation. Naomi and Brandon were hosting a charity gala for their workforce development program. Jerome was invited not as a former husband, but as a colleague, someone whose opinion they valued. He wouldn't go. That part of his life was over, and Naomi deserved to celebrate her happiness without reminders of her past pain. But the invitation itself was a gift, proof that she'd truly forgiven him, that he'd finally become someone worthy of her respect. That evening, Jerome sat on his small balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset. He wasn't rich, wasn't powerful, wasn't the man he'd once pretended to be. But he was honest now. He was useful. He was helping people who'd lost everything find their way back, just like someone had helped him. In the distance, he could see the lights of Naomi's beachfront mansion, where she was probably planning her next business venture or enjoying a quiet evening with the man who truly deserved her. She'd gotten her revenge, complete and perfect. She'd shown him exactly who he really was when everything false was stripped away. But more than that, she'd given him the chance to become someone better. It was the greatest gift anyone had ever given him, and he spent every day trying to be worthy of it.